Today we have John Catsimatidis. John is known as the common sense billionaire who's had a storied career across various industries such as grocery chains, aviation, real estate, oil, media, and much more. He's been involved in various political and philanthropic initiatives as well, and has recently published a book titled, How Far Do You Want to Go? Welcome to the show, John.
Well, thank you for having me. And, I've tried to, I bought a radio station a few years ago and tried to make a difference in the world. And I wrote the book to try to make a difference in the world, to make a difference in some kids' opinions of how to succeed.
Absolutely. And we're really excited to jump into the book. It's right here. But before we get to that, let's just start with giving our audience a bit about your context. I know in the beginning of the book, you talked a lot about your upbringing, your family immigrating to the U.S. Could you share more about that journey?
My two grandfathers came to the United States in 1913. They came to find the streets that were paved with gold. That's why all the Europeans came in those days. The joke I tell is, well, it took me 100 years to find the gold. Then my father was left back in the old country in Greece, and he was working for the Italian government, watching a lighthouse for 17 years to be able to earn some lira to feed his three sisters and feed his mom. And after World War II, he lost his job with the Italian government. The Brits took away those islands, gave it back to Greece. He went back home to his home island of Mykonos, married my mom, had me, but he was 6 months late in coming to America because I could never run for president. So I came here, I was 6 months old in 1949.
Gotcha. And when you talked about your parents, it reminded me so much of my parents as well, where you had a dad that basically gave the family everything when he came to America to try to make ends meet. And you also had an extremely loving mother. When you talked about your mom peeling the skins of your grapes, my mom literally did the same thing for me. And so
there's nothing that the love of a mother has for her child, and the father dedicated his life to making sure I got a good education, and he worked 7 days a week.
Absolutely. And how did that shift or change how you were raised?
You know, kids feel love. And I felt the love. I felt the love that my father had. I felt the love that my mother had. They were always there for me. Even when my mother yelled or my father yelled, I knew they were doing it to make me better. It's so important. You know, I work for the Police Athletic League now as a hobby. We take care of 40,000 kids in the inner cities. And you know what the problem is with the kids in the inner cities? They don't feel loved enough. The kids in the inner cities, Senator Moynihan wrote a piece one time that the problem was that 30% of them, only 30% of them had mothers and fathers to take care of them. Well, the problem got worse. The problem now is that 70% of them don't have mothers and fathers. So what we do is, with the Police Athletic League, is bring these kids into centers to have some place to go after school, because the mother works till 6 o'clock and the kids get out of school at 4 o'clock. Between 4 and 6, they can get into a lot of trouble. And I was lucky enough to have a mother and a father that they were always home and they were always worried about me. And that makes a big difference in life. And that's the reason I work for the Police Athletic League, is to help save some of those kids. You can't save them all, but we want to save as many as we can.
Yeah, I mean, that's a vicious cycle, right? Someone grows up with a single parent and that kind of trend continues. And
after school, you go to the pizza shop or you go to the candy store that we used to call it the candy store. And these guys, the drug dealers, would go around with Cadillacs and say, see, you work with me, you can have one of these.
Exactly.
And then we lose those kids forever.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in your book, there's a part where you talked about being appointed to West Point, but you made the decision not to go due to your parents seemed to be against it. A question I have is, what advice do you have for people that are trying to balance the expectations of their parents that may conflict with their own desires?
Well, the other thing was I was an only child, and where am I going to leave them? And I understood that. Versus a family that has 5 children or 6 children or 7 children, I guess it's more easy to let one of the 7 or one of the 5 go. So I always wanted to go to the Air Force Academy or West Point. I ended up going to New York University. I came home every night, and I guess that's what my parents wanted. And I felt their love, and I felt that they wanted me home, and I wanted to be home too.
Yeah. And so let's talk about, your time at NYU. That's when you first started getting into the grocery business. And that was, I would say, one of your first successes was in that industry. Can you share how that happened?
Well, I was ready set to stay home the whole summer before NYU. And my mother threw me off the couch. I was going to watch television. And she got me a job in a local grocery store. And the guy that ran the grocery store ended up being like my big brother. I go from extreme to extreme. I ended up working 70 hours a week, helping make that store a success. And then one day in my senior year, he comes to me and says, I'm having troubles with my uncle that we have another store with. We argue every day, and I don't want to have family problems. I want you, John, to take over my shares in that store. I said, but I'm going to school. I never said no to Tony. He was like a big brother to me, and I called him cousin. I called him brother. And I took over half the store. Me and his uncle never had an argument. And I made that store a success using good old American know-how. And if you work 70 hours a week and use good old American know-how, guess what? You're going to be a success. Partners never have an argument if they're both making money.
Yeah.
Partners have an argument if they're not making money. And that was the reason that him and his uncle were having problems. But it was my senior year at NYU. I finished 4 years, but I was 8 credits short. So I never got my diploma. I lost out there too. But I was doing well. I ended up opening up 10 stores within 4 years, 5 years. By that time, when I had 4 or 10 stores, I ended up making $1 million a year when $1 million was really $1 million.
Yeah. Back in was that the 70s?
Early 70s, 70, 71, 72, 73. And then what put me into the next phase, I realized owning the grocery stores and renting them, someday you're going to be thrown out when your lease is up. So in 1977, the world was coming to an end in real estate in New York, something similar to what's happening now. And I took excess cash flow I had in the supermarket business, bought real estate, and guess what? In 4 or 5 years after that, all of a sudden that 4 or 5 million I put into real estate was worth 100 million. And that's how I made the first 100 million.
Yeah. And John, speaking of that, comparing the period in the late 70s to the period now, and just for our audience, this is being recorded in July 2023. What are some of the similarities you see in the real estate market?
The stores are empty. Interest rates are so high that nobody wants to buy any real estate. So there's a lot of similarities. But New York always makes a comeback. So I've told that to people, and I have to emphasize that to a lot of people. I spoke to the governor this morning in New York, and we both emphasized that. And when there's a time of tragedy, somebody always loses, but somebody always wins. So my advice to people is well bought, half sold. In other words, don't pay too much for anything. Make low offers. I had a mentor from Chicago one time, and another mentor named Joey, and he says you throw 20 pieces of XYZ against the wall. Some of them are going to land. So if you make 20 offers that are ridiculous, 1 or 2 of them, 3 of them, I might say yes. And I ended up buying the real estate cheap. I ended up making good investments. All of a sudden, it was worth a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. And that part of your story I thought was very interesting when you were talking about using real estate as collateral to then get loans to get the United Refining Company. Can you kind of talk about how, owning real estate, I wouldn't say it's like a safety net, but it kind of allowed you to take different risks or get different leverage to operating your business. Can you share more about that?
Well, yeah, real estate, there's a real reason why it's called the first 4 letters. It's real, and you're able to borrow on it. So I remember I established a credit line with Bankers Trust. It was a big bank in those days. And I I put up the real estate I had, some of the real estate I had as collateral, and established a line of credit. The reason for a line of credit is when opportunities come along, you're able to hit. And I ended up starting the corporate jet company that ended up becoming NetJets. I used to fly all those airplanes, and that was part of fun. I ended up buying an airline that was the 11th largest carrier and running it for 2 years. I lived in Nashville for 2 years running Capital Airlines out of Smyrna, Tennessee. NetJets ended up growing to 48 airplanes. When I came back, when Capital Airlines, we sold it because we saw the end coming. When I came back to New York, I was depressed. Here I am running a worldwide airline. And here I am coming back to New York to run 30 grocery stores. And that put me into a lot of depression. But I used my credit lines. And within a year, I bought the oil company that was in bankruptcy. I bought Pantry Pride from Ron Perlman, and I gave him the money from Pantry Pride to buy Revlon. Then I bought Gristedes Foods from the Southland Corporation because they had 7,000 7-Elevens and 48 Gristedes. The CEO says, what am I doing with 48 Gristedes? We're in the convenience store business. So coming back from Nashville because of the airline back to New York, I ended up buying those three companies, and it took me way up into the major leagues, and I had to sit down and work hard to make sure Pantry Pride in Florida, we had every store from Key West all the way up to Palm Beach or Riviera Beach. Gristedes, we merged it with the Red Apple stores I had in New York. So we ended up with 100 stores in New York. We ended up with 50 stores in Florida. And then United Refining, the oil company, we ended up with 400 convenience stores and the refinery. So we all of a sudden, I used that original real estate for collateral, and I was able to have the credit lines to buy those three companies, and that's what set us up for success.
And so, John, were you accumulating real estate essentially from the proceeds of the grocery business, and then you leveraged that to then get into those other industries?
Absolutely, that's what I did. I took the excess cash flow and bought real estate that nobody wanted, with the idea that worst scenario was if I can't find a tenant for the real estate, I'll open up another supermarket and make enough money to pay the mortgage. And that's the way I figured it out.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially when you get into any opportunity, knowing what are your different pathways to play that specific opportunity. I wanted to dive deeper into what you're saying about Capital Airlines. So, here you are running a massive airline. It doesn't go your way. You go back to that. And, many entrepreneurs experience that at different levels, right? And so I'm curious, how did you tell us about what was the mindset or what were you going through to bounce back, right? Because it seemed like you went down on a dip and then just an exponential up.
What happened is we sold the airline to someone. We had worldwide routes. We sold the airline to a guy in Puerto Rico, and he was going to just use the Puerto Rican routes to fill up the hotels he had over there. And when he ended up going bankrupt in the airline, we went to bankruptcy court to get back our airplanes that we had as collateral. And we went to bankruptcy court, and that's where we found the oil company. And we bought the oil company with the same trustee in the bankruptcy court.
That's incredible. You find opportunities in unexpected places.
There's so many opportunities. That's one of the things about the book. You're going to find so many opportunities where you have to either zig or zag and make a lot of decisions. Depending on those decisions will depend on your success. And the other thing I talk about in the book takes you through the entire history of step by step towards success and building diversity. Diversity is if you're only in one business and that business doesn't do well, guess what? You lose. Mm-hmm. But I made sure I was in the supermarket business. I made sure I was in the airplane business. I made sure I was in the real estate business. I made sure I was in the oil business. Diversity. If we had 5 different businesses, if 3 of the 5 did well, it carried the other 2. So I try to teach diversity. If you have all your concentrations in one place and that one place sinks, you're in deep crap. It's over. But diversity does help.
And so, John, how do you decide what opportunities to pursue as you're trying to expand into diversity?
Well, remember what I said from some of those mentors. Well bought, half sold. If you pay a ridiculous amount of price for something in this adversity, guess what? You lose. If you bought it so well and you fix it up a little bit, you win. I'll give you an example. My son, we own a lot of gas stations. We own 400 gas stations. And my son comes to me and says to me, Dad, they're selling for 18 times EBITDA. They're selling for 14 times EBITDA. And I said, son, that's a big number. Well, what happens now? All of a sudden, interest rates go up. All those people that bought the gas stations at 18 times, 14 times, guess what? The higher interest rates are squeezing them, and a lot of them are just going bankrupt. So if you overpay, the chances of you having a problem are much higher up. So you have to determine that you have to buy it well. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to survive right.
All right. So you're seeking more of like the opportunity, not first looking at, hey, here are the industries I want to go into. It's more about being opportunistic and identifying here's a great purchase.
Yep. If it's a great purchase, then you're able to succeed.
Right. And when working across such a wide variety of different industries, can you talk about the team that helps you operate across all of this that allows you to keep on moving to the next opportunity?
At the beginning, you're an entrepreneur. You try to run everything. Mm-hmm. You try to be on top of everything, try to run everything. But you got to go to the next step. And you got to be smart enough to say, wow, it's getting too complicated. I got to go to the next step. So what I did is I created divisions. And each division or each company has its own president and financial officer. So they're the chief responsible people for that company. And then we have, at the parent company level, we have people that observe what they're doing. And we have people that jump in and fix a problem if there's a problem. Because you got to keep, what I've always done, and I've done it very successfully, is you keep operations and financial separate. And financial always not only reports to the company president, but it also reports to the financial officer of the parent company. Because you have to know what's going on. And that's the way we were able to do other things and create success.
Great. And where do you think entrepreneurs overcomplicate things? One thing I loved about your book is the whole common sense approach. And so where do you think entrepreneurs overcomplicate things?
When they overcomplicate things, when they hire 38 consultants, you got to be able, if you're not capable of chewing gum and walking at the same time, you got to realize it. Every company you buy, you better be capable of running it. And running it if you have to jump in and run it. And that's important. But because if you're not capable of jumping in and running it, then you better not buy it.
Right. And on that note, John, so in the beginning, when you start a business, obviously everybody just starts from the ground up. They find their business instead of purchasing one. But as you go or down the chain or further in your career, does it make more sense to just purchase businesses instead of starting from scratch?
It depends on it. Where I've found my biggest success is I buy businesses that are broken and I fix them. I buy businesses that are in bankruptcy court and I fix them. And that's where I found my best successes. I laid that out in the book. And by the way, the other thing about the book, on page 255, you have some tidbits that say, if you're afraid of losing, you can't win. And the other thing I tell about people is it's not simple. It isn't simple success. If you're not ready, if I'm working 100 hours and I'm still not making it, I'm going to work 120 hours. So there's sacrifices in business, and you have to be able to allow yourself to sacrifice to become a success. You have to be able to be able to have common sense, and know when to zig and know when to zag.
Yeah. Yeah, John, let's jump straight into that part of it. Yeah, I think it's titled Counsel by Catsimatidis. And so I believe there's 15 or so concepts there. And like you said, the first one, you can't win if you're too afraid to lose. Another one I really liked there was hire people who know more than you and inspire them to do their jobs. And another one is mentors are hugely valuable, but take only the best from each of them.
I had many mentors, like my friend Joey, who was a brilliant guy in finance, but he had other problems. So you have to be able to take the brilliant part and use it, and being able to draw the line when it comes to some of the bad parts, and make sure you don't cross that line to the bad parts.
Right. I've heard the saying, take the fruit, leave the peel.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to mentors, how do you recommend somebody go about finding mentors?
If you're in the food business or if you're in the oil business, you find the guys that are older than you, that have a little bit of gray hair, and you attach yourself to them and ask a lot of questions. Take them to dinner, spend time with them, and you'll be able to get a few tidbits there and a few tidbits to be able to make you better.
Gotcha. Great advice, John. Another one I thought was very interesting was take reasonable risks, somewhere in between reasonable and risky. And for our audience of entrepreneurs, how do you think about risk?
Risk is being able to make a comeback without losing completely. In other words, I remember when I bought the airline, I had to make a down payment of like $1 million or something. That was a lot of money to me at those days, 1983. A lot of money. But I knew if I failed, I wasn't attaching. The rest of my companies would not go bad if I lost in this one.
Right.
So make sure you keep everything separate. Don't ever attach, diversity. Don't forget food, oil, real estate, convenience stores, etc., etc. If you go into a deal with a bank or with anybody else, a lender, where they attach everything together, forget about it. We can't do that. Because if something goes bad, you want a piece of the sector to go bad. You don't want everything to go bad. It's like the big discussion I had with with all the cyber stuff that's going on. And I met with the IT department and I said, look, I don't care that it costs more. I want the real estate department in a separate IT system. I want the grocery department in a separate IT system. I want the aviation department in a separate IT system. That way, if we're cyber attacked, guess what? We lose one of them. We don't lose the whole damn thing. And that's where people have to be smarter in that. It might cost more, but it's worth a lot to be separate. And that way you don't lose the whole damn thing.
Yeah, absolutely critical there. Another one of your pieces there was time is the most precious commodity. And so I'm curious, how has that changed as your career evolved? Right? Like when you're younger, you're willing to put in a lot of the hours. And then later on, I'm sure how you spend your time
Yeah,
changes.
but
How's that
you have
shifted?
to be able to use your time effectively. I know some people that have a 3 hour meeting in a meeting that should take 10, 15 minutes. Don't sit there for 3 hours wasting their time and wasting your own time. Bang, bang, bang. You have to be able to make a decision and go with it versus trying to just stretch it out.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, John. I think a question that a lot of people probably have on their mind is, what's a day in the life of a billionaire look like?
Oh, let's say I get home. I try to go to dinner almost every night, but I get home. I'm tired. I go to the computer. I check my emails. I check my texts and go to sleep. And the first thing I do in the morning, check my emails, check my texts all over again. And then I get to the office and bring all my texts, all my emails up to date. Go to the office, and we have different meetings, different staff meetings. I try to have a staff meeting where every department at least once a week. You got to know what's going on, and with the staff meetings, it should be with the entire staff that runs that company. Don't limit you information from only one portion of the company. Make sure you have everybody there that has the ability, to tell you what the heck is going on. Because if you're only listening to one person, guess what? You lose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm curious, John, in terms of how you manage your day or week, how much time do you spend now on work versus, your personal interests, et cetera? How do you handle that now?
When the kids were growing up, I always made time for them because I didn't want them to grow up and all of a sudden they're old and you never spent any time with them. So whenever they had Thanksgiving weekend, in between Christmas and New Year's, Easter break, Easter, 4th of July, a long weekend, I always tried to take time with my kids. That was always very important with me. And that was my hobby. When I had my kids, I stopped flying. So, and I don't play any golf. I mean, I don't have 4 hours to spend on a golf course. If you're only running one company, then you got 4 hours to spend on a golf course. But when you're running 7, 8 companies like we are, you run out of time.
Yeah. And John, on the topic of managing energy, right? Obviously, running 7, 8 companies, that requires you to be very mentally sharp and on top and showing up, because you show up to a meeting and they're at 100% and you just came out of, 6, 7 other different categories, different industries. And so how do you manage your energy so you don't reach like a state of burnout?
Lately, I've gone into this new diet. It's called intermittent fasting, where you eat only 8 hours during the day and 16 hours you don't eat. It's remarkable. It gives you new energy, and it gave me new energy. I stay away from sugars, carbohydrates that slow you up. But I do have diabetes, so that I shouldn't be eating sugars and carbohydrates. And you try to keep your mental acuteness up. You go into a staff meeting for one of the divisions and you put that hat on and you can't worry about the other divisions when you're in that meeting. If you're in a supermarket meeting, you think about supermarket problems. If you're in a real estate meeting, you think about real estate problems. You try not to mix them.
Right. Yeah. The power of focus. So for those that are, on the journey and pathway of accumulating wealth, I'm curious just to, you've obviously gone down that journey. So what are some of the newfound freedoms that come with accumulating wealth?
It depends how you want to change it. I always used to like to be able to. I remember one time when before I had kids, we took every weekend off and we took our airplane and we went to a different we went to a different amusement park in different cities every weekend for that whole summer, and it was just an adventure. You look for adventures. You look for things to do.
Yeah. And what are some new traps or pitfalls that might come with that pursuit of wealth?
You're giving up a lot of time. You're giving up time. When I was working 7 days a week. When I was working Saturdays and Sundays, and my friends were out on ski weekends. When I was working Saturdays and Sundays, my friends went to the football games on Sundays or college football games on Saturdays. So there is some sacrifice, but you got to be there to make sure things happen because you're the chief responsible person, and there's sacrifices come along with success.
Yeah. John, a question I've been thinking about for myself, and I'm very curious your take on it, is what's the main difference from your perspective from millionaires and billionaires?
The main difference, everybody's a millionaire these days. I mean, it's if you if you own a house, the houses on the East Coast are all $1 million houses. The difference is being able to make the next hurdle. I'll give you an example. If you bought a piece of real estate in New York City, where there's 9 million people, and you bought it for $1 million, in 5 years, it's worth 5 million, maybe, during a certain periods of time. Versus if you bought a piece of real estate for $1 million in Kansas City, in 5 years, maybe it's worth $1.5 million. First of all, in a place like New York City, there's worldwide investors. There's 9 million people that are going to like that piece of real estate versus you have a limited audience in other parts of the country that were smaller cities. So you want to become a success, the big cities are the place to do it. So that's one of the things. The other thing is location, location, location. It's just a little bit of luck sometimes too.
Yeah, I think when you talked about, the Kansas City versus New York thing, I mean, what we're talking about there is just a simple supply and demand dynamic, right? And when people think about real estate, I think there's a common two sides of it, right? Where, okay, hey, let's go for cash flow, let's go for appreciation. And it seems like in the long term, appreciation is what actually grows your net worth much more significantly.
Absolutely. The capital gains, especially in real estate. I'll give you an example. The tax-free capital gains. There are secrets in the real estate business. You take a piece of real estate, you can depreciate it. I remember when I bought the real estate in Florida, part of the Pantry Pride acquisition, and I separated the supermarket company from the real estate company. And Ronald Reagan, in December 1986, created a new law that you could depreciate commercial real estate over 13 years. Could you imagine being able to take a piece of real estate, depreciate it over 13 years, and in those 13 years, it might be worth 10 times the amount? I'll give you another example. Suppose it's a shopping center that you bought for $1 million, and all of a sudden that shopping center, so you put up $800,000 to buy a $1 million shopping center, and suppose that shopping center is worth 10 million. If you found a friendly bank, you can borrow 80 cents on the dollar, $8 million in that $10 million building that you only paid $1 million for. And that $8 million is tax free.
Exactly. Because it's a loan.
It's a loan. And I've made $1 billion that way because I haven't sold it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so interesting. I've only recently started getting into real estate investing. When I look at the depreciation, running your cost segregations, all the tax benefits, doing the refinances, things like that, I mean, it's incredible versus just trying to earn directly and get eaten up by federal and state income taxes.
There's other businesses that have those tax advantages. The other one that insurance companies, insurance companies that if somebody, we have our own insurance company. If somebody sues us for $1 million, and if you don't settle it for 5 years, you keep that $1 million liability on your books for 5 years. In the 6th year or 7th year, if you end up settling it for $200,000, you have to take the gain, but you had the write off for 5 years, 6 years.
Right. Saved you that time
Yeah.
during that period. Okay, great. So, John, I'd love to go back and finish this episode here with just covering your book here. And so, what I loved about your book is that it's you sharing your lessons along the way, but it also puts together all these various historical events that happened along the way. And so, I thought that was a really cool way of writing that. So, the first question I have is, what's the idea behind the title?
Well, I tell you, my publisher said he liked it. How far do you want to go? In other words, some people want to say, I already made $1 billion. I don't need I'll take it easy. I don't have to go make 2 billion. So it depends how far you want to go. Is $1 million enough? Is 100 million enough? Is $1 billion enough? So you have to decide how far do you want to go and how to maintain the businesses. And originally, I said to myself, maybe I don't want to run supermarket businesses all the time. So I'll buy real estate, collect the rent. And guess what the advantage of buying real estate and collecting the rent is? If you collect the rent in the first 10 days of the month, if you really want to, take the rest of the month off.
Yeah.
And that's the theory. So, but I never stopped working because I was enjoying what I was doing. And if you enjoy what you're doing, it's not really work.
Yeah, absolutely true. And so why did you begin the book talking about Federal Hall?
Because I was so proud that I never knew, the first capital of the United States was Federal Hall in downtown New York City. And I was so proud to be there and to acknowledge it. And, I'm an immigrant. I got my citizenship papers when I was 5 or 6 years old. And I was proud to be an American.
Yeah. That really shined throughout the book, talking about the pride of being American and just the amount of opportunity we have here. And so, John, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Everybody go check out John's book. It walks through his incredible journey through various businesses, industries, ups and downs. So, John, thank you so much for coming on here. Really enjoyed our conversation.
It's available on Amazon. It's available on Barnes & Noble. But if you go to our radio station, wabcradio.com, and order it from the bookstore, I'll autograph it for you and we'll send it to you.